Something you'll realize when you start coding is that there are many ways that you can code the same thing. For example, if when it comes to indentation, instead of using spaces, you can use tabs, or vice versa. Instead of tabs, you can use spaces. And then when you write your for loop, your while loop, your if statements, you can place your braces in different ways, and then the compiler doesn't really care. It's still going to run your code the same way. And then there's also different ways that you can name your variables. The compiler doesn't care how you name them because it's all up to you on how you name them. And then lastly, there's so many ways that you can comment your code. And like I keep saying, the compiler doesn't really care about what kinds of comments you're putting in your code. So these kinds of things, it's really up to you, and the compiler doesn't care, and your program's going to run the same way. But it's still important to care about these minor things. And when you're starting to learn how to code, you may not worry about these things, but then when you start working with a team or when you start building larger and larger projects, it becomes important on making sure that you're consistent in how you format your code. And that's all so that you can have better readability of your code and make it easy for yourself and for others to understand your code. And this kind of thing is called, in just one phrase, it's called coding conventions. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about what coding conventions are, why they're important, and I'm going to share some coding convention tips for you that I learned in university. And these tips are tips that I've taken with me into my career, and these are tips that I use every day at my work. So I'm going to be sharing those, and I'm going to share how I apply those tips to an example. So I'm going to go through an example and then apply these coding convention ideas and principles to this example code. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to share some final comments about coding conventions and how I've seen it play out in my career. So let's get started. So my name's Henrik, and I'm here to help you learn the foundations of software development. So let's get started. But before we begin, I'd like to mention that I do have a free workshop for you. It's called my Capstone Project Workshop. And in that workshop, I go over 3 secrets to coding your own Capstone project in just 3 months. Now, why did I create this workshop? The most common goal that I get from people who apply to my one-on-one programming mentorship program is to, quote, be more proficient at creating projects. You and I both know that learning how to code is more than just memorizing code syntax. It's about applying your coding skills to real-world projects that make you feel confident and capable. So if this sounds like you can download this workshop in the link in the description. And if you download it and watch it and pay attention to what it says, then you'll definitely build a good foundation to your software development journey. All right, so what are coding conventions? Coding conventions are just a set of guidelines or best practices for writing code that is clean and consistent. And you write your code so that it is in such a way that it is clean and consistent for the purpose of making your code maintainable and readable. The way I like to think of coding conventions is it's kind of like culture, like coding culture. For example, there's social conventions, right? If you go to one country, there are social conventions, social norms there that you need to abide by in order to fit into that society. And so likewise, when you go to different companies, there is a coding convention there that they're going to follow. And if you want to get by in that company, then you will need to follow their coding conventions. And if you abide by their coding conventions, then you can build on their code. They can build on your code, and it will be easy to maintain. And all of everyone's code is going to be readable because they're all following the same coding culture, or in other words, the same coding convention. All right, so now let's go through an example. So I have this program here. It's called guess.c, and this is already this program has bad coding conventions. First of all, the program name, guess.c, you don't know, it's a kind of a guess what this program is doing. So first we need to rename this program, maybe have a smarter name for the program. But if you look at this program, it's hard to understand what's going on unless you had developed it yourself. If you're looking at it for the first time, it's hard to understand what's going on. There are these variables that the names of these variables are so ambiguous: X, Y, Z, char is A, and then srand. I don't know why there's an srand there. So the first thing is you want to follow the right spacing. And so in this program, this is a C program. So we want to make sure that we follow the right spacing, right indentation. So for example, here we need to put spaces here. And one coding convention that I learned in my previous company is and a lot of people will debate about this. Most people agree with me about this, but usually you can do tabs or you can do 4 spaces. So there's actually a keyboard shortcut that we can use instead of doing it manually to make sure that all of our indents are done properly, to indent everything here. So what we can do is we can do Alt-Shift-F. And so there you go. So now everything is indented properly. And so now we can read the code a lot easier now. Now we're understanding, okay, there's actually an embedded while loop here. And you can see here, it actually moved the curly braces from here to here. Now, I like to move the curly brace here like that. And then say I do Alt-Shift-F, it's going to automatically move it back. Something I learned in university that I still like to do at my jobs is like I keep saying, I like to put the curly braces here. I think this makes it easier to read in terms of what these statements are doing. Because if you do it like this, and people will debate me about this, but I like doing it this way because now it's easier to see that the lines here correspond to these if and else if statements here. So these statements here, like 28, 29, 26, 20, 24, like you can see it already how like it fits within this if else if code block. Furthermore, you use less lines, so it's more compact. Also, this may not be considered a coding convention, but we were told not to use do while loops because this kind of has to do with readability, but if you do while, it's not readily understood what condition is used to go through this loop. But if we have a while loop, then it's easy to know because we have the condition here that will tell us what this while loop is for. But if you want to know what the condition is to keep going through this while loop, then we have to scroll all the way to the bottom and then look at this while loop here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this up. And then the problem here is that this while condition is only going to execute if a is equal to one of these two. So maybe what I could do is I can just initialize it to y so that it will run for the first time. I think the next thing we should do is we should change the variable names. So instead of x, y, z, we should make them more meaningful. So x is going to probably be a random number. This is probably going to be the number that we're going to guess. We can call this secret number because this is the number that we're going to guess. So let's replace that. Okay, let's change y. So what is y referring to? Y is the guess. So we're going to change that to user guess because this is the number that this variable is for the user's guess. Okay, let's rename z. This is probably the guess count because every time we make a guess, the z is incremented. You can see it over here. Z is incremented every time you make a guess. So this is actually probably a guess count. Okay, last variable we change is probably a. So a is probably going to be, maybe we can make it play again. Okay, we've renamed all the variables. So now it looks more readable, right? Now it's more readable and maintainable. So we have play again here. Now we know what this variable is going to do. Okay, so naming your variables is a coding convention that you want to make sure you're following. They're different conventions. So there's this coding convention here is called camel case because it kind of looks like a camel where you have different humps here. But there's also snake case. And so snake case looks like this. And again, it depends on who you're working with, what their coding convention is. They might name their variables like this. And so you can argue for the case that this is more readable, but for me personally, I don't like having underscores in my variables, but it kind of depends on how I'm feeling. Sometimes I like to do it the camel case, or sometimes I like snake case, but usually I like to go for camel case. Another coding convention that I follow is you don't want to make your lines too long because sometimes other people will look at the code. Maybe they have a smaller window. For example, here, right, in these lines, line 20, I have it wrap around, and it kind of looks a little bit like a headache to have it wrap around like this. And sometimes you don't have wraparound and you actually have to scroll sideways to see the rest of the line. And my face is kind of blocking it. But something that I like to do for if I have a if condition that looks like this, I like to separate out the if condition like this so that it's readily understood what the conditions are. Maybe I even put like some brackets here so that I can make it more readable, so that it's clear that there are three conditions here that I'm searching for to be met. So this is how I would break up the lines so that it wouldn't be too long. And also down here, this is kind of getting a little bit long. Some people have different, they have a number of characters per line. Some people will say between 80 to 100 characters per line. I want to come back to this one here, and there's actually a lot of conditions here. When I see a lot of conditions in an if statement, it makes me think about if there's a way I can remove all these conditions or simplify it, because if there's so many conditions there, it can be hard to follow a little bit for other developers. And you can see some redundancy here. For example, there's user guess is greater than secret number, and then there's another condition that it's not equal to the secret number. This one here is, we can actually just get rid of this, because if this condition is met, this condition is always met. So you can just remove that. Something else that I like to do is I like to have some empty lines between blocks of code that go together. For example, this printf here, it's at the end of the program, and I want to separate it from this while loop here, the main while loop. So what I would do is I would like to put an enter here, because just to signify that this is for that while loop, this is the main loop. Then I want to separate out the printf, and I might sometimes want to do this, and then I can also separate out this part here, and then this srand here, we can do this to separate out the variable declarations, and this function here for seeding the random number generator, we can separate that out. I think now is a good time to also talk about comments. So if there's some code that I think may not be readily understood, then I'll put a comment here like initialize random seed, so that they know already right away what this line of code is doing. And this actually saved me a lot in my company. I've been able to understand code a lot faster when the previous developers would put these kinds of comments in the code. Last thing I will say is we can actually split this main function into smaller functions, and this function is not too long yet. I mean, it's only 44 lines of code, but just to give you an idea of how easier it will be to follow if we have functions, I'm gonna create different functions for this program, and then we'll break it down into smaller functions. And when you see it broken down into smaller functions, it'll be a lot easier to follow. Okay, so I've split the function into smaller functions. We have a display win message that displays the win message. We have a play game function that we initialize these variables here that we had earlier. We pick the random number, we initialize the guess count to 0. And then we have the while loop here that will check if we're guessing the right number or not. And then this is the main function here. We initialize the random seed here at the top here. And then we have the while loop that will keep playing a new game. As long as the user keeps saying that he or she wants to keep playing, we'll keep this while loop going. So we split this main function into smaller functions, the ask play again and the play game function, and we've made the program a little bit more readable, because now we have these functions, and we also have more comments telling the user or telling the developer what these functions are doing. All right, now I just want to share some final remarks for coding conventions. I gave you some of the coding conventions that I took from my university, but as I kind of alluded to, every programmer has learned different coding conventions. So when you work with a team, you really need to see what everyone else, how they're coding, and then you want to decide as a team how to go about your coding convention for your team. And so I remember when I was mentoring some students in how to program, I had a team of mentors, and we all had to agree on some coding conventions that we wanted our students to take. So if the students give us code, we want to make sure that they're following the right coding conventions and give them some basic ideas on coding conventions in general. And so we established our own culture, so to speak, for our how we write our code. So I didn't agree with them on all things, but even though I didn't agree with them, because this is what our team agreed upon, I had to follow it. And so the main idea about coding conventions is you want to make sure your whole team is on the same page, so that as you're developing code together, everyone can easily read each other's code. And so there's that culture that is established, and everyone's following that culture, and it's easy to understand each other. So the ultimate rule is you want to follow the coding convention of your company. So when you join a company and you start working, you want to ask if there's a coding standard, or there's some coding conventions that the company agrees upon, and make sure you follow it. And a lot of times you're going to be given code bases that are really huge, and a lot of developers have worked on it, and you'll even notice that there are some coding conventions that are true in one file, and then in another file the coding conventions are not followed. So what I usually do in my companies is I follow the coding conventions of the same file. So if one file is using all tabs, and I don't agree with using tabs, but if the whole file is using tabs, then I'll go ahead and use tabs too, just so that I'm following the coding convention for that file. If you want to dive deeper into coding conventions, this is a good book that my company has talked about before. It's called Clean Code by Robert Martin. And I've gone through this book. My company has bought this book, and I've looked through the book a little bit, and there's a lot of helpful things in there with regards to coding conventions. So if you want to dive deeper into this topic, this is a book that I would recommend, Clean Code. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a free workshop for you, my Capstone project workshop. And in that workshop, I go over 3 secrets to coding your own Capstone project in just 3 months. So if you want to become more proficient at creating your own projects, you want to move on from these tutorials and create your own projects, then be sure to check the link in the description and watch my coding workshop today. Alright, that's it for this week's video. I hope it really helped you out and gave you some ideas on coding conventions. And I'd love to hear from you too. Are there any coding convention tips here that I shared that really stuck out to you that you want to apply in your future projects? Please let me know in the comment section. And if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any other questions, feel free to let me know in the comment section, and I'll be sure to answer you there. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.